to, I don't know if we can put the bylaws up on the screen.
Yeah, I can try.
Yeah,
They're also linked in the agenda too. So if
Mhm.
people grab them that way, but in the meantime, I'll also put them on the screen.
I can put them on my screen, but it hides all the rest of you. So
Yeah.
there we go.
So it'll just take me a second to get back to them because the screen gets filled with everything else. There they are. How's that look to you guys?
good.
All right, so Stan was referring to this section 2 powers. I just highlighted the language that we updated, so it was easy for people to spot.
I just think that does a good job of clearing up the question as to what exactly is a quorum.
And then Stan, the other thing too that we might want to draw attention to, we did clean up the language on your suggestion about the powers to appoint new members. I think there were some changes there as well.
Yeah, down at section 6.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I put this in suggesting mode just so we could see it a little more clearly. So I don't know if there's any thoughts on that, if we like it the way it is now.
I like that. But then again, I won't be president forever, so I mean, for the rest of the board to weigh in on that's.
I think it looks good.
Pete?
Yeah, me too. The only slight question I would have is if, I suppose it's nice and vague, the shall appoint. I wouldn't want us to be burdened by having to appoint someone and feel like we can't do anything if we haven't been able to. Either we don't come to agreement or there aren't any candidates. But there's no time limit or sort of repercussions to being shorter person. So I think it's totally fine, but maybe someone else has a thought on that.
Andrea's probably biting her tongue because she's really good at spotting shells and mays.
I'm stay in my lane.
Would there be a benefit to changing that to may, or
Let's think that.
thoughts on that?
Facial expression says no.
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah, I think may would be fine in that. Poor Andrea. That you're right, because we have a range of, as long as we wouldn't fall out of compliance in terms of the required number of board members. So but that's stated elsewhere in terms of staying within the required number of board members. So I think a may would make sense. You're right. We might find that we're on the upper end of the board members, and as a board, you decide that it's not required to fill that vacancy.
But it says right there too, can I just, if needed to meet the minimum number of GB presence required by statute at the end of that sentence already.
Oh yeah, if you keep on reading the whole sentence, that is a really good strategy. Read the whole sentence.
That's too hard. I can't do it. Sorry.
Yeah, you're right. So then in that case, the shall is required. So.
Got it.
That's the first thing that gets you in law school. Read the whole sentence.
It's usually best.
Generally advised.
Okay, so accepting these. I see a nod from Pete. I can only
Yes.
see a few people because my screen is divided. Other than that, I think There were just, at the bottom, I had director a couple of times. I spotted that, so I changed that to governing board member. Because we don't use director in here anywhere else, but there.
Well, being that we do have a quorum present, I will move that we adopt the bylaws. We have a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Bylaws adopted.
All right. We'll convert these to a PDF later.
Mhm.
Doesn't look like there's any required signatures on this. So.
Well, if
We're
you
good.
find that it does, just let us know and we'll start the mail train.
Yeah, worked well.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is a presentation from Andrea Volker on the Wisconsin open meeting laws and rules and regulations. So Andrea, take it away.
Okay, well, I did email to Sarah today, sorry for the late notice, a few tips or a few documents that can provide some tips on a really exciting topic, I would say. It would, the reading, if you make it through, I try to give a couple different formats, whether it's bullets in that brochure or more the more verbose one with the summary provided from WASB, the two parts, because it's not super interesting from the perspective of the nuances of the law. But I think the idea behind open meetings law is exciting. I do, because it was such a shift from the old school government approach. And that's why I like to start off with talking about the overall policy of the open meetings law. And so it's declared to be the policy of the state that the public is entitled to the fullest and most complete information regarding the affairs of government, as is compatible with the conduct of governmental business. And then all meetings of all state and local governmental bodies shall be publicly held in places reasonably accessible to members of the public and shall be open to all citizens at all times unless otherwise expressly provided by law. And it's also been specifically written in the law that this law shall be liberally construed, which means that the default is openness, which again was quite a historic moment at the time when all the sunshine laws were coming into place, because that was not the practice. And so I do think it's a really great way that has been created to shed light upon what's being done in the government. That in combination with the public records law, which I think the two melded together are really a great approach and that sunshine focus when it comes to the operations of the government. I'll point you to a website because I know y'all are going to want to look at more information on this when you're done with this meeting. It's the Wisconsin Department of Justice, the Attorney General. He has a few different compliance documents. There's like a 120-point slide, page slide on open meetings law, and there's a whole other one on public records. There's quite a bit of a lot of different interpretations of the law, and so if you ever have questions, the compliance guide is quite useful. The compliance guide is pretty searchable. It's pretty helpful, and both with respect to the open meetings as well as the public records. But real quick, some important aspects of the open meetings law. You guys are, because you're created as a function of the school board, a governmental body, and a subunit of the governmental body. So that's why it's required that you be in compliance with open meetings law as well. And then the next really important piece is the definition of a meeting, because this has been interpreted hundreds of court cases over the years. But the statute itself states that a meeting means the convening of members of a governmental body for the purpose of exercising the responsibilities, authority, power, or duties delegated to or vested in the body. So if 1/2 or more of the members of a governmental body are present, so quorum, the meeting is rebuttably presumed to be for the purpose of exercising the responsibilities, authority, power, or duties delegated or vested in the body. The term does not include any social or chance gathering or conference which is not intended to avoid this subchapter. Essentially, if y'all run into each other at a concert, you don't have to worry about that kind of chance meeting, chance social gathering. But if you were to say, hey, let's hang out at Starbucks on Wednesday and talk about the agenda that's coming up on Thursday, that's a problem, right? Like that would be deemed a meeting, and that you would have to have that posted. Otherwise, that would be in violation of the open meetings law. So in terms of what needs to be posted on that meeting notice, because you have to provide at least 24 hours advance notice of a meeting, unless it's an emergency. The definition of emergency is very narrow. And so the emergency still needs a 2 hours advance notice. But in terms of the contents of the notice, what you need to have, the overall analysis from a storm case was you have to give advance public notice of each of your meetings and conduct all of its business in open session, unless an exemption to the open session requirement applies. So you need to talk about time. They need to know what time the meeting is. You need to know the place. You need to know the date, the subject matter. The agenda itself needs to be populated and not with generic topics. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The matters intended for consideration at a closed session, if appropriate, in my understanding, you guys won't be doing a whole lot of closed session type of situation. So if you were to want to discuss something outside of open session and closed session, you would want to Dave or Aaron or Sarah can certainly reach out to me and I can help draft a closed session notice to see if it applies, because there's specific exceptions for closed session. And then again, the 24 hours advance notice. Who is to receive the notice? The public, which for our intents and purposes, we as a school district post it like on our front door. We also post it on our website. So the public gets notice of the upcoming meeting. News media who file written requests, which is dwindling at this point, and the official newspaper, which for us, rivertowns.net, I believe, is kind of now the entity that has made the request. And then any kind of other news mediums that we deem appropriate to ensure that proper notice has been provided. So those pieces, I think administratively, we handle a lot of that. But you really want to be careful in terms of the content of the agenda, because I think that's where you guys will probably have the most workings on a regular basis. There's quite a bit of case law about like generic items. So for example, in the 70s, I would say more often than not, an agenda would say old business, new business. And then who the heck knew what was discussed under any of those topics? And that's been outlawed pretty much. I mean, with open meetings law, you can't be that generic. You can't do just a staff report. In fact, like generic topics like any kind of report on as a regular agenda item that's not more specific as to putting the public on reasonable notice of what the expected conversation is going to be about shouldn't be on there. Your approval of the bylaws totally makes sense, right? Like that's something where you have a specific agenda item to be acted upon. Even this, the public knows that I'm presenting an open meetings law. There's not a question as to what's going to be done at this time. If all of a sudden we start talking about a contract that we want to enter into with a private company during this agenda item, then that's a problem. Again, the whole crux of putting people on notice is that it's reasonable notice so that the public has a general idea of what topics will be discussed and or acted upon at any particular meeting. So I think that part is really significant in terms of creative ways in the past that I just want you guys to be aware of attempts to get around some of that, because sometimes it's hard. It's hard to talk about topics in open session that can be challenging. But like things like written correspondence or emails, if you start engaging in that with your fellow members, that can be problematic because it could be deemed a walking quorum. You don't want it to appear as if you're engaging in governmental business outside of that open session meeting, right? Please interrupt if you guys have questions. I don't need to just keep spieling. Those guys know I can a lot, so I'll just keep going. But so written correspondence, emails, anything like that could be a problem if you're trying to gather consensus for a particular belief that you have on this agenda item. Not really, the whole purpose is to do that in open session, have those robust conversations in open session. Telephone conference calls are another thing. Any kind of way that you're communicating with somebody outside of that meeting can be problematic. So you want to be aware of that, because you do not want to have, again, that walking quorum, which the Attorney General has repeatedly in the Wisconsin Supreme Court and even the US Supreme Court in different ways with the federal FOIA laws has interpreted walking quorums to be a problem. So you want to be cognizant of that. The other thing you want to be aware of, and this dives a little bit into public records, is that you want to be aware of the communication you're doing to your colleagues if it's about business of this position. So as a member of this unit, are you emailing somebody about the upcoming board agenda or upcoming agenda for the charter schools? Then you have to recognize that that is a potentially, it's regarding governmental business and could be subject to a records request. So I always say, pause before you send those emails, because we at the school district all the time get records requests for something like every time a teacher has mentioned this particular word in their curriculum, I want to see every record, whether it's an email, whether it's a Google Doc, whatever it is, then we have to go searching for it all. Your records would also be responsive. So just be aware with using the Hudson Raiders email or doing any business with your hat on as you know, a member of this entity, that you would have to potentially provide that as being responsive. So whether it's a walking quorum issue, I just always like to give a little kind of caution about public records, is that just be aware that you could be creating public records that could be subject to release. Be careful with those emails, with social media, all that kind of stuff, because it can be problematic. In terms of, sorry, I'm like already on my time. So want to make sure we talk a little bit about, so the closed session and specific carve-outs like I discussed, and that you really want to be careful. You want to do as much in open session as possible. Then you're voting, you determine, typically you follow Robert's Rules of Orders, and that's what I'm hearing so far. It sounds like you're basically following the Robert's Rules of Order. That provides for some consistency and frankly, more openness as part of the regular course of business and transactions of the board. And then there is potential, if we violate the public record or the open meetings law, that there is a potential forfeiture for a violation. I can think of one situation where there's a forfeiture of individual board members because of a violation of open meetings law. Much more common, it's the voiding of the action. So if someone contested an action that was taken saying that it was done in violation of the open meetings law, less likely to be civil or individual liability, much more just to say, okay, we're going to have to undo that action. The court would come in and say that action is void or voidable because of that failure to comply with the law. If you focus on this the summary for Wisconsin school boards 2-page handout, you're going to get the bulk of the information you really need to know. Beyond that, I'm happy to help Aaron, Dave, Sarah know that they can reach out to me at any time with any questions. If you start wondering about a particular direction you're going. But if you're open, if you put it on the agenda and you clearly lay it out there for the public in a easily viewable format, you will not most likely run afoul of the open meetings law.
So, Andrew, question for you. So
Yes.
Let's say a board member has information that they think would be beneficial for the rest of the board to see or read. How would they go about getting that to the board without being in violation?
They should provide it to, I'm assuming Sarah or you, I don't know for sure how you guys
Yeah,
have it set
Sarah.
up, Sarah, to just make it up to her to decide of how she's going to disseminate that information if she deems it appropriate to disseminate that information. What we don't want to do is have, for example, an email go out saying, I feel very strongly that I need to vote no on this issue because of all this information that I got from these people in the community, right? Because although the information from the community may be important, that first piece could develop a walking quorum if Sarah was then to transmit it on to the other board members.
Yep.
So I would just be cautious. But at the same time, if Sarah would be the medium by which that you would have that communication instead of the individual board members.
Great. Thank you.
Andrea,
And-
one quick question. Is there any requirement for us to have the agenda item where we approve, previous meeting minutes?
It's very typical, and your bylaws typically dictate. I mean, you do have to, the meeting minutes are a part of the open meetings law where you have
Right.
to create them. And I think to avoid any kind of points of contention in the future, it's always best to approve those. You can do that as a matter of course.
Okay.
But I do think, again, with the whole purpose of the law being liberally construed, I think having those minutes approved regularly, I think just reinforces that principle.
Thank you.
I have to say hi to Melissa, by the way. I recognized you. Hey, how are you? Haven't seen you in a long time.
It's been a very long time.
Very long time. I've known her since what? We were like 5, 6.
Yeah, probably.
Andrea,
We'll have to talk if you have good stories sometime. That would help us a lot.
No
No,
picture.
for either of us. No.
Yes, yes. No. There's a few. We were in acting together. Her mom with Judy.
Mhm.
Stage door players. We spent a lot of time together growing up.
Lot of time. Yeah.
A lot of unfortunate. At one point, I still think of the Cheshire Cat.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. No, this is where the stories need to end.
And sorry, yes. Real unfortunate. Oh, Sarah, I know you had a question.
totally fine. I know we now have hudsonraiders.org emails for all of our governing board members. How does that play into, do they need to become used to checking that email and using that email for all of our governing board business? Would that be best practice, recommended? If you could touch on that a little bit.
Sure, I would recommend if you're doing board business that you use the school district email. And I mean, I don't know how hefty the responsibility is going to be. I think our regular school board members check it at least weekly. I would expect probably more than that. But if you guys aren't getting as many emails, I would say probably the first few months, you probably want to get into the habit of at least checking or having it, forwarded onto your other email account. But if you start, this is a big caution. So if you would start using your personal email to conduct governmental business, then if there is a records request, it could potentially expose all your personal emails to a search that myself or somebody else in administration would have to do. So that's why I always think it's best to keep those lines clear, keep the silos of your emails clear, because email has become, not as familiar as texting, but still it's a very familiar way in which we communicate that can be personal in nature that you don't necessarily want other people in there looking at. So if you can keep it separate, I think that's always best practice.
And just to add a little bit to that, the idea of forwarding to like an account that you check regularly works well. I would just never respond from that then. They're like,
Right.
oh, I see there's one that someone sent something and it triggers a response. Then you go back to your official hudsonraiders.org account and any responses from there. That keeps everything very clean.
I'm wondering, I have a question. Well, first of all, this is really cool. I didn't know about all this. Thank you. And
You like it, it's exciting.
it's neat. And to be actually, sort of expected to do it. I'm like, oh, okay. I've never thought about it this way before. So I'm not, could you sort of walk me through how, like, let's say we as a board decided to research alternative, virtual class providers. and we said, okay, we're going to have a few volunteers, you know, a couple people are going to go make a list, and then we'll look at it as a board, and maybe they'll present options with, you know, background that we decide on.
Yep.
How does that subgroup work? Should they not talk to each other? I'm sorry.
This is where it's a little odd, because if you guys delegate the work to Aaron, Dave, Sarah, they can do all the collaborating that they need to do. It would just be that then they present the information to you that you then take action on. You can independently look at stuff too, but you're essentially, as an entity, because we have to remember we only act as an entity, we don't act as individuals. You're delegating that research component to other people who are free to do as they need to complete that objective, and then bring it back to you to present the information.
Okay.
So another thing that I'm sorry, Pete.
No, go ahead.
Another thing you could do is you could always post a work session. So you post it, you give the notice, and then you could all get together. And then anyone that would want to observe that work you're doing could come in and do that. And then you're totally okay. Or you could do it virtually like this, now that we have this ability to post to YouTube Live, so people still would have the ability to join in and watch the work that's being done.
Right, gotcha.
And if you think of it overall, as the whole purpose is to make sure that the people, the public, is an informed electorate that's aware of the business being conducted by our officials. And so you guys are now officials, and you want to make sure that we're acting consistent with that. So I don't think you can ever err on the side of being, acting, in the sunshine, in the light of others, so that they can be aware.
Yeah. Are there any governmental boards of, or whatever, government entities that are under this that have are there any like public bulletin boards where people sort of have asynchronous conversations, but it's always wide open and available?
It's highly discouraged to have, because I'm thinking of one case that was just decided a few weeks ago, or maybe it's months, no, lose track of time with COVID, but it was specific to that point where there was sharing of information, kind of like an invited dialogue, but the topics were posted. So then you, as board members, you shouldn't be commenting back. You can only really comment as the board on items that are noticed to the public. And so it got to be an issue of, yes, you can listen to the feedback from your constituents or from, members of the public, but to engage in a dialogue back and forth, you can't do.
Yeah.
So it's really discouraged, because you also want to be aware that some of these people may not be aware that this could be public record too. And there's been many people burned by that situation. And there's some people, Facebook, good thing, bad thing, but there's been quite a few, like as they're running for re-election. Election's one thing, but re-election is a whole different thing, where they're with the start of the campaign are still public officials. And so if they're engaging in dialogue on their private Facebook page about running for election, you open it all up to the public inspection. So just cautionary notes in that. To me, you really want to be aware of what hat you're wearing when you're doing the conversation or doing the action.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's great.
Yep. If y'all want to ever dive into more public record stuff or anything else, you just let me know.
I can keep asking questions. I don't want to take up the whole meeting because I'm curious. So
yeah, no, it's and really the OAG's, the Attorney General's website for Wisconsin is really good. It has a lot of really great information for that curiosity. I mean, there's really kind of fun court cases too when it gets into what can and can't go into closed session. But I think it's just interesting information, and it's good to know that all of our governmental entities are expected to follow the same rules.
Well, and I take comfort in knowing that Andrea's not going anywhere. We can ask her to come back to one of our future meetings and
happy to do so.
issue our get out of jail free cards if we need them.
I bet you guys will never get there. I bet you'll all be good to go.
Andrea, thank you very much. Like Peter, I am also being enlightened and will indeed go look at some of that additional information that you provided. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Anybody else
Thanks,
have any
Andrea.
questions before we let her go? Gone. Say it.
Right, one more agenda item left, Stan.
One more agenda item left, and that is the governing board application process. And I'm open to any and all thoughts on this. One of the things that did sort of pop into my head though was as we mature here and we get our Parents Advisory Council established, and do we want to look at pulling governing board members from the Parent Advisory Council so that you're actually pulling people that have some experience with what it is that we're all engaged in? Do we make that just a suggestion, or do we give precedence to? I mean, I guess I'm just, I don't want someone that signs up to become part of our Parent Advisory Council to feel as though they're locked in that position and cannot, move to the GB. So, any thoughts? I mean, Sarah, the process that we used for all of us to get to where we are today seemed pretty clear. I mean, there was a background check and a, short application and, what's your interest, and let's make sure that we're not, pumping the board full of district employees or that type of thing. But I thought that application process was pretty clean, pretty simple, and I don't see where it needs to be a lot more complex.
I think for as far as someone transitioning from like the PAC to the governing board, the first time, unless we have a resignation, so we have a spot like a year from now in July. Sorry, my internet is kind of not great right now, I think. So I think that's a really great thing for us to be thinking about if we have parents who are part of the Parent Advisory Committee this year, that we open up that application to them as well as other, Hudson residents or community members that we might see fit. So.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea too, as a natural progression for someone who's really interested and involved. And I would say, I don't know that we need any formal, again, like we don't have, personally, I have no, experience in anything basically. So I'm just, I would say sort of, we want a big wide channel to start with. And then we could probably formalize a few rubrics to help us decide if we had a problem of having many, many applicants. But now I think there probably is going to be not enough applicants for a while. So I think it's a great place to look for them.
So what I'm hearing is that we should purchase a larger net.
Yeah, what's our advertising budget? And we need attack ads against neighboring virtual schools. Central, what are they doing to your children?
Okay. We've just been hit with our first public records request. Oh.
I stand by my word.
Any other thoughts?
I'll offer just one thing in it. The nice thing is that now we sort of clearly define who is eligible to serve on the governing board and who's eligible to serve on the Parent Advisory Committee. There is some crossover, but not total. We had talked about the idea when we look for additional governing board members, we might target specific aspects or sectors of the community that would help round out perspective and context. That same logic wouldn't be applied to the parent advisory, because the main thing there is that they are parents of students in the program. So I think as we get our feet under us a little bit, that will become very clear on the roles of the two organizations. Having not started with the one organization yet, it's tough to even know what that will look like.
Mm-hmm.
Stan, do you want to update them on the letter that was sent out to previous applicants this week?
Oh, sure. We looked at the list of applicants that were not made part of our initial startup group here, and I drafted a letter to that group of people, basically saying, hey, here's where we're at, here's where we've come from. You expressed interest in the past. If you're still interested, at our last meeting, we voted to increase our membership, the governing board size from the current 4 members up to 7. And that we're, now if you're still interested, just, send a nod and we will take action on this at our annual meeting, and gave them the date of the meeting, July, whatever it is, 16th or whatever it is. That we have had one respondent that said yes, they were still interested. So, but I mean, that letter only went out yesterday morning. So the small net has been cast on people that have already expressed interest, and I firmly agree. I started thinking about homeschoolers, and do we want to make sure that other people in the community are aware of what we're doing, so that they can use that to their advantage if they're trying to market Hudson or the Hudson School District or what have you. Can we make sure that we're getting correct information out into these people's hands? I mean, I think particularly about the Board of Realtors or the Chamber of Commerce type people, where you'd want to let them know what it is that we're doing, and let them share that with people coming into town as they see fit. So that could be at least 2 different little entities that we may be interested in. If nothing else, making sure they get meeting minutes and knowing what it is that we're up to. So. Dave, you've got a puzzled or questioning look on your face.
No, that's just my natural look. No, I think your discussion is spot on. The nice thing is, I mean, with the Parent Advisory Council, when we look at that process, it's great that first of all, someone already expressed interest so quickly. That's fantastic. And I agree, the process that we went through the first time that got us to where we are now seemed to work relatively smoothly. The big thing that I think will help us get to the next level is when we actually start getting open enrolled students from other districts, because that's the perspective that's going to help us understand more than anything else. Because our own internal perspective, really, we already have that. We have the group of people that will help us understand what does the Hudson Virtual Learning Academy look like and how can we improve that. Now is the next step to really enhance the charters, to understand how we can encourage others to consider us as an option if they're non-resident students.
But by definition, I think that the governing board members must be members of the Hudson School District. If we were to have students enrolled from outside of the district, those parents of those students would be eligible to serve on the PAC and offer us whatever guidance and insight that they may have, but we would not be opening the positions on the board to people outside of the HSD.
Yes,
I mean, that's my understanding.
I don't believe that there's anything that I've seen that would prevent someone from outside of HSD from being on the governing board in the future.
and that's the part, I'd have to look back. I'm not certain. Now that we say that, I'm not certain. And I could, honestly, we'd have to look at the contract and the law to make sure. Sarah's looked at it a lot more than I have. So that's an interesting piece, right? Because it's a governmental agency appointed by the board. So you would think there would be, you know, a connection to citizens of the community would make sense, or the school district. So I'm not sure how we'll have to take a look at that, because if that were the case, it would really make sense. The distinction between the PAC and the governing board would make a ton of sense, that the PAC would allow for a variety of perspectives that could then advise the work that essentially tax-paying community members would be acting on as part of the governing board. But we'll have to dig in just to make sure we're totally clear on that. Now that we have an approved contract and bylaws, we probably should be pretty clear on what it's all saying.
Yeah, we can, if you guys would like, we'll make sure we get some clarification on that.
No, I just went back into the bylaws, and you're absolutely correct, Sarah. The section that I thought was limiting there is not limiting to the governing board. So.
And again, applying the logic to that might very well be, we don't have taxation authority, so maybe that's why that distinction isn't necessary.
Yeah. I don't see anything about residency,
Okay.
but we can dig into that.
And at the risk of going slightly off topic, because this wasn't on the agenda, but you had mentioned budget. At an upcoming meeting, when you're ready, we're working on a rough outline of budget parameters that we'll be able to bring to you. So you just let us know when you want that on an agenda, and we'll bring that forward.
Well, that leads us to the annual meeting coming up in July. Would we want to have one working meeting between now and the annual meeting to do that budget review?
I did put the budget as an item on the annual meeting.
Right.
So I don't know if we need to review it before that, but it is on the agenda for that.
I personally think that would be a good idea, to have one opportunity to review it ahead of time, since it's the very first look. It's not just an updated budget that you haven't seen before. I think that would make a lot of sense, and maybe just a single topic discussion of the budget, just that one piece. If that's what you want us to do, we can do that. We can find out what dates work for you and then get that scheduled.
I think it would be helpful, so we're not just walking into it blind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense. We will do that. And that's really, I mean, honestly, that's a really good example of abiding by open meeting laws. So here's a topic we want to discuss. We won't discuss it behind closed doors. We won't be sending out a bunch of stuff. We'll put it on a work session agenda. Everyone can talk about it openly, ask whatever questions, provide any guidance, and then hopefully, based on that guidance at the annual meeting, bring forward a budget to you that you feel very comfortable supporting.
I would throw out Thursday, July 2nd. That's 2 weeks from now and 2 weeks before the annual.
That probably works for me. I might be in a car.
And, you know, I should mention too, I don't know what your work schedules look like. We're sort of following a typical board member schedule where the meetings are scheduled at a time where they're comfortable for many families to attend. the time of the meeting is open too. So once you set that, if you have a better time that you think would work, we can do them. I don't think it's great practice to have a lot of daytime meetings, but every once in a while, if you need a work session that you fit into the day because your evenings are filling up, that's okay as well.
Well, and I'm not dead set on Thursdays either. I mean, if Tuesday works better or whatever, so. Yes, convenience is important.
Maybe since Shelley's not here, we'll just send out an email with.
I would suggest not the second. I'm actually have a cold.
What was that, Sarah?
Oh, I was just saying, July 2nd would be rough for me. I have a neck injection that day that I'm getting, so I'll probably be asleep that night.
Well, how about June 30th then, the Tuesday before that?
Be better.
Works for me.
Mhm.
Melissa?
Yep,
June
that's
30th?
fine.
Same 5:30 PM timeframe?
Yeah.
One single agenda item?
Perfect.
I guess one question is if we have a working group meeting, do we need to do a review and approval of the previous meeting minutes for that meeting, or do we do that at our next full board meeting?
Typically, you'd want to do that at the next meeting because that's a topic for action. So as much as you can keep a work session without action, it's nice. Like tonight, we mixed it up a little bit where you had a topic for action and then the rest discussion. It's nice if, again, from the public perspective, if they know they're not taking any action here, they're only discussing. I don't have to tune in. Whereas if you start mixing up that discussion, a community member might say, oh, now I have to wait for this big long meeting and I'm really only interested in this one piece. And you can approve multiple minutes. Like we're going to approve the minutes for this meeting and this meeting and this meeting all at one meeting. But typically as a matter of course on a monthly basis or whatever the typical regularly scheduled meeting would be, works well.
Good point. So the working meeting, June 30th, 5:30 PM. Anything else to come before the board tonight? I call the meeting adjourned at 6:20 PM.
Nice. Thank you all. It really is fun working with you. It's fun to get all that legalese stuff out of the way and start to dig in. So really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.